Hi, I'm Kaylee, and today I want to talk about bilingual reading. The first thing I want to do today is take a look at our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to randomly pick somebody in here, and we're going to subscribe to them. Suna Jung. Oh, I'm sure I'm probably saying their name wrong. Oh no. Actually, I'm really surprised this is the person who I completely randomly picked this, you guys. But Suna does all of her videos in Spanish. She is one of the Spanish booktubers that I follow. And I swear I did not pick this on purpose. This is completely random. But Suna is our booktuber shout out today, which is perfect on a bilingual video. And please do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and go ahead and give this video a like if you can read in 2 different languages. So first of all, a little bit of history, a little bit of backstory here. I am bilingual. My first language is English, and I am American, but I grew up in Mexico from the time I was 5 until I was 17. So of course, I became fluent in Spanish, and I still like to read sometimes in Spanish. But recently, I have been trying to read in Spanish, and I've been finding it more difficult than usual, more difficult to concentrate. I'm finding that maybe I'm forgetting some of the Spanish that I used to know, and I really want to build up my vocabulary in Spanish more. So I just had some thoughts about what it's like to read in your second language. Even if you are fluent, it's just kind of different. So of course, you have to leave me a comment down below if you are bilingual and if you ever have these same kind of issues or just different things that happen when you read in your second language. Whenever I start to speak or read in Spanish, or even if I'm listening to someone speak Spanish to me, or I'm watching TV in Spanish, there's this weird little mental click that goes in my mind. It's almost like a gear shift where it's literally a different part of my brain that is taking in that new information. It can be really strange. Sometimes I swear it's like I can literally feel the gears going, okay, Spanish now, okay, English now. It's just, maybe that's just my imagination, but I felt that ever since I was a kid. Since I first learned Spanish, it feels like, okay, I have to switch out of English and into Spanish. But of course, a lot of the time, those gears get stuck about halfway, and you end up speaking the perennial, the delightful Spanglish. So half your sentence is in English and the other half is in Spanish, and God help you if people can't understand what you're saying. That happens to me a lot. This is Kaylee from the future, coming back in time to tell you that after I filmed this video, I thought of a whole bunch of more stuff that I wanted to say. I talked to my mom, and the things that she said about being bilingual was like, wow, yes, you're so right. Then I talked to my little brother, I talked to my dad, I talked to one of my friends at church who is also bilingual. She speaks French and Creole and English, and just all these different ideas that different people had about their experiences, and then comparing that to my experience. I have a bunch more stuff to say. So much of it seems to depend on how old you were when you learned your second language. And some of it I think is just personal aptitude. Some people just have a really great ability for language. And the third thing that really seems to make a difference is how you learned it, whether you learned a second language through hearing it and speaking it, or whether you learned a second language through writing it, like through in a classroom and learning to read it. I did not learn my second language by writing it and reading it in a classroom setting. I just learned it by hearing it and speaking it. I think that accounts for so much of the difference in the way that I experience that gear shift when I switch to a different language. Now, keep in mind, I am certainly not a neuroscientist. I have no knowledge or expertise about how the brain stores language, but just from my own experiences and talking to others about their experiences, this is kind of like my idea of how this works and why my brain is the way it is. Because I was so young when I learned Spanish, And because I learned it through speaking and hearing it and not from writing it, and because I learned it in such a compartmentalized social setting where when I was speaking to someone in Spanish, that was just it. There was no English involved. When we first moved to Mexico, my parents went to a language school, and so they would be in class all day, well, not all day, but for several hours a day, and they would be learning Spanish in a classroom setting while we children were at home with our Mexican nanny, and we learned Spanish from her. She spoke no English. So the way that I learned Spanish was a much more kind of natural, instinctual way that a child, any child, would learn their primary language. They just hear it all the time from one person who does not speak any other language. And you just kind of through gestures and through, just everyday things, you learn what words mean. So the way that I learned Spanish was very similar to the way that a toddler, a baby, learns their primary language. It's not through writing, it's not through a classroom setting, it's just through observing and listening and mimicking the way that a person talks. And it was my mom who actually defined this idea of how my brain stores the language that I learned as a child. She said that I am experiencing that kind of gear shift sort of thing because I'm actually processing my second language as a primary language. My brain is storing it in the same way that English is stored. So I feel this complete separation between the two, and I feel like my brain is shifting to another primary language. I learned Spanish by understanding the meaning of the words, not by learning their equivalent from English. No one taught me to say, this is the word in English and the equivalent is this in Spanish. I just learned the meaning of a word in Spanish, separate from the meaning of that word in English. Other people, when they speak in their second language, they are translating their primary language thoughts. They think something in English, they translate it to the second language, and then they speak it in that second language. And I don't do that. I just speak in Spanish. I just know Spanish. However, this kind of almost like having two primary languages means that it's really difficult to translate. So I have always had so much trouble trying to translate anything from Spanish to English or back and forth because it just feels so jarring, like I'm constantly shifting from one to the other, and I can't let my thoughts flow smoothly from one to the other. And I never understood, why is it so hard for me to translate? And my parents, they'll just be jabbering away a mile a minute and they'll hear something in English and translate it for someone in Spanish and back and forth. And they don't seem to have any trouble with it. But for me, it's always been like so much cognitive work to try to translate because I didn't learn my second language as a translation of my primary language. And I just didn't learn it that way. My brain did not store the information as this is a translation of English. It just stored the information as this is a language. I feel like I'm not making much sense, but in my brain, that makes sense. Now, I know you're probably thinking, she's been talking a long while now about being bilingual and speaking in Spanish, and I have yet to hear a single word of Spanish. Entonces voy a hablar un poco en español para que puedan saber que sí, de verdad, ella sabe español. Viví en México por muchos años y tal vez pueden ver que mi acento es definitivamente mexicana y viví en el DF por muchos años, así que tal vez pueden ver en mi acento que soy del DF, a veces me llaman chilanga, ¿verdad? Si ustedes quieren ver videos en español, por favor de escribirlo ahí abajo para que pueda saber quiénes son mis amigos latinos aquí en YouTube. And if that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. They've actually done studies where they show that people who are fluent in more than one language really do think differently than other people. They really do experience language totally differently from other people. Like our brains are actually wired in a different way. So maybe that accounts for my imagination of that gear shift thing. I'm just weird anyway. What this means for my reading, though, is that once I have gear shifted into Spanish reading, and then somebody comes up to me and interrupts me and is speaking English to me, I have kind of this jostling moment where I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, okay. First of all, I'm jostled out of the book that I'm reading, and I'm jostled out of the language that I'm reading, and it's like, okay, no, back to real life and back to English. So it can be much more jostling, much more almost like upsetting, not really upsetting, but it's startling to be interrupted while I'm reading Spanish than it would to be interrupted if I were reading English. Because there's two things that are startling me. I'm being startled out of the book, and I'm being startled out of the language that I was in. So what that means is I don't read in Spanish as much as usual because I need to set aside time to read in Spanish where I'm not going to be interrupted. So I do spend a lot of time reading at work in between customers or just waiting for the phone to ring, but that means that I'm interrupted a lot of the time when I read at work. So I don't like to read Spanish when I'm reading at work. I would rather be at home and, turn my cell phone off or whatever and just set aside like an hour or something where I can just immerse myself in the language and kind of get into this different rhythm pattern of the sentences and the language and how it all fits together. And then I feel like I can concentrate because I don't want to be interrupted. I find that the more time, like a length of time that I spend being completely immersed, not just immersed into the story, which is always a pleasant experience when you're reading, but also immersed into the language, then I feel like I understand better. I start to read a little quicker, and everything just flows more nicely. The more time, the more length of time, a chunk of time altogether that I can spend reading in Spanish. So first of all, I do read more slowly in Spanish than I would in English. Like in English, I can kind of skim maybe and kind of get the gist of things, but in Spanish, I have to sit and read every word and kind of analyze what I'm reading to understand what is happening. I'm a little bit slower in Spanish. It can also be really hard to find books in Spanish here in the United States, which I think is crazy because there's such a huge Hispanic population in the United States. Now, if I go to my local library, they do have a small section of books in Spanish, but of course it's not as large of a selection as there are of English books, obviously. I also find that a lot of the time, those books are written in Spain Spanish, not in Mexican Spanish. So it's sort of comparable to like reading a book in British English instead of in American English. So you can pretty much figure out, like they say the boot or the bonnet or fish and chips or whatever, and you kind of figure out and you know what they're talking about. But so much of the time, British books are rewritten for American audiences. Hello, Harry Potter. And they will sometimes change the names of things or the words of things or stuff to accommodate American readers. However, you don't see that as much in Spanish. So it's almost like reading a dialect of Spanish a little bit. So every once in a while, I'll run across something where I'm like, what? What is that? And then I'll have to get out my Spanish to English dictionary and look it up and see what that means. So it's just, I don't know, it's not that it's bad, it's fine. It's just one of those little things that is a thing when you are reading in another language. So those are just some of my thoughts about my bilingual reading habits and my bilingual reading experience. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know, how do you find your reading experience in your second language? Do you really try to keep up with it and keep up with your vocabulary and stuff like that? Or do you find that it's really difficult, it's really jarring if you get interrupted? Or do you feel like me where there's this funny little gear shift in your mind where you switch to a different language in your brain? Maybe that's just me. My brain is weird. I don't know. So the other day I put together a poll asking you guys, Are you bilingual? And these are the results of our poll. 38% of you say that you are fluent in at least 2 languages. I had no idea. That is so cool, you guys. I had no idea that so many people here were bilingual. I think that's so fantastic. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know, what is your second language? On another note, I have thought actually about starting a secondary separate BookTube channel where I basically just do all the same content that I do here, like literally all the same videos, but just in Spanish. So just kind of translating all my videos over into Spanish. Might be kind of fun. Let me know down in the comments if you would follow me, that new channel, if I decided to do a channel in Spanish. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.